You heartless monster. You have no heart or feelings or love. Prison is too good for you. This is hard to say, but may God have mercy on your soul.
We loved you like a son. We trusted you. Your faithful wife trusted you. Your children adored you.
Mr. Watts, why did you kill your wife and 2 children?
Mr. Watts, did you confess?
What is coming out of that prison cell right now in April 2026 is so calculated, so psychologically revealing, and so deeply troubling that once you hear it, you will never see this case the same way again. I made a promise at the start of this video that by the end you would understand something about Chris Watts that no other update has said out loud yet. I am going to keep that promise. Stay with me. Before we go any further, if you appreciate deep dives into true crime cases that go beyond the surface and reveal the psychological patterns most people miss, hit that like button right now. And if you are not already subscribed to True Crime Dre, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. This channel is built for people who want the truth, the full story, and the details that matter. Now, let's continue. For anyone newer to this case, we are not going to spend time recapping the murders from the beginning. You know what Chris Watts did if you clicked on this video. You have seen the documentary. You have seen the interrogation footage. You know about Shanann. You know about Bella and Celeste. You know about Nico, who never took his first breath. What this video is about is everything that happened after the sentence. What this man has become, what he is doing right now, what he is saying to the outside world, from inside that cell, and what every single word of it reveals about the kind of person who could do what he did and then wake up the next morning and keep on living. This is the April 2026 prison update on Chris Watts, and there are details in here that will genuinely stop you cold. Chris Watts is currently housed at Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison in Waupun, Wisconsin. He has been there since December 2018. That transfer happened less than 1 month after his sentencing. He was moved out of Colorado under what is called the Interstate Corrections Compact. The reason for the transfer was documented clearly: his safety. His notoriety in Colorado made him an immediate target, both from other inmates who knew exactly who he was, and reportedly from corrections officers who despised what he had done. So, Colorado shipped him out. Out of the state he destroyed, out of the community that mourned the family he murdered, into a maximum security facility in Wisconsin, where he has remained ever since. Dodge Correctional Institution is not just any prison. This building has history. It was formerly the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. Serial killer Ed Gein, the man whose crimes gave birth to some of the most iconic horror films ever made, including Psycho and The Silence of the Lambs, was once housed inside that same building. And if you follow true crime closely, you probably know that Stephen Avery of Making a Murderer is serving life just across the street at Waupun Correctional Institution. That is the neighborhood Chris Watts calls home. He is currently serving 5 life sentences with no possibility of parole. 9 charges in total, 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, 3 counts of tampering with a dead body. He is 40 years old. He will die inside that building. Most of us, when we picture someone serving life for what Chris Watts did, imagine a certain kind of existence. We picture guilt. We picture collapse. We picture a person consumed by the weight of what they chose to do. But what the letters coming out of Dodge Correctional in 2025 and into 2026 reveal is something very different from that picture. And to understand why it matters, you first need to understand what his day-to-day life actually looks like. Chris Watts lives in protective custody at Dodge Correctional. That is not a minor detail. Protective custody means he cannot be placed in general population. He cannot mix freely with other inmates. The reason, as sources and prison officials have confirmed, is that he would not survive it. His crimes follow him everywhere inside those walls. His daily routine consists of working as a custodian, mopping floors, cleaning common areas. He exercises. He attends Bible study. He writes letters. Since arriving at Dodge, he has received 2 formal conduct violations on his record. One in 2020, for unauthorized forms of communication and unauthorized transfer of property. One in 2021, for disobeying orders and possession of contraband. Neither was severe enough to result in major disciplinary action. but they tell you something. The compliance, the mopping, the Bible study, the quiet routine is not the complete picture. There have been moments where his instinct to operate outside the boundaries placed on him surfaced. And then there is this detail, confirmed in 2019 and never successfully challenged since. Chris Watts kept photographs of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste inside his cell. When this became public, over 20,000 people signed a petition demanding that prison officials remove those photos. The outrage was immediate. The idea that this man could look at the faces of the people he murdered every single day felt like a violation on top of a violation. The petition failed. The Department of Corrections confirmed there was no legal basis for removing personal photographs from an inmate's cell. The photos stayed. He still looks at their faces. What he feels when he does is the question at the center of everything that follows. Let's talk about the letters, because this is where the story of Chris Watts in 2026 stops being a straightforward prison update and starts revealing something far more disturbing about who this man is. Since arriving at Dodge, Watts has received a volume of mail that is extraordinary for an inmate, and it arrives in two very distinct categories: death threats and love letters. In the same mailbox, Watts himself confirmed to investigators that he has received both threatening correspondence from people who want him dead and photographs of women in bikinis, all arriving through standard prison mail. He stated he only chose to respond to people he already knew personally before his incarceration. But sources who have tracked his correspondence tell a different story. A source speaking to People magazine was direct. They send him photographs, and he writes back. There are women, a significant number, who find him attractive, who believe he is misunderstood, who initiate contact through prison pen pal platforms designed to facilitate this kind of correspondence with inmates, regardless of their crimes. And the source added something that is one of the most quietly devastating observations in this entire case. He has nothing else to do, so he feeds his ego that way. Because inside Dodge, away from the letter writers, away from the admiration arriving in envelopes, he is despised. He is not popular. He cannot walk freely. He is protected from people who would hurt him if they could reach him. The correspondence is not incidental. It is, for a man of Chris Watts' psychological makeup, essential. It is the one arena left where he can still perform the version of himself that draws positive attention. He was a man who conducted an entire secret affair while presenting as a devoted husband and father. The performance of being desired, of being chosen, was always central to how he functioned. Prison did not remove that need. It just changed the audience. Among the many women who have written to Chris Watts during his incarceration, one has come forward publicly with correspondence that has genuinely shocked people who follow this case. Her name is Deborah. She first reached out to Watts in 2022, 4 years into his sentence. Over the following years, they exchanged letters regularly. He told her about his life in prison. He told her about his faith. He presented himself as a man who had been broken down and rebuilt by God. A changed man. A transformed man. A man whose suffering had given him a new relationship with Scripture and with Christ. Deborah, by her own account, was drawn into the version of himself he was offering. Then, in late 2025, Watts ended their correspondence. The reason he gave her was not that he had found someone else. It was not that the prison had intervened. He told her that God had decided they could not be together. He wrote, in his own words, that he believed in a different time he would have been able to be with her, but that God had other plans for his life. A man serving 5 consecutive life sentences with no parole, no appeals horizon, no legal mechanism that removes him from that building, was romantically letting down a pen pal by telling her it simply was not God's will for them to be together. That sentence alone would be enough to define the level of delusion we are dealing with. But the letters Deborah received before that farewell are something else entirely. In October 2025, Chris Watts wrote to Deborah and articulated clearly, and without apparent irony, his understanding of why God had placed him inside Dodge Correctional Institution. He wrote that God had a plan for him, that God wanted him in prison, that this was God's will in the same way it was God's will for Jesus to die for the sins of the world. Let me say that again so it lands properly. A man who strangled his pregnant wife, who drove his daughters to an oil field while they were still alive in the back seat of his truck, who forced the bodies of 2 toddlers into crude oil tanks with openings so narrow that investigators found scratch marks on the metal and a tuft of blonde hair caught at the edge. That man is comparing his prison sentence to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But he did not stop there. In further letters, he wrote, and these are his own reported words, that while he would never fully understand what Christ went through when he was crucified, his own trials had given him a glimpse of it, a glimpse of the crucifixion. He is the one who suffers. He is the one whose pain carries spiritual weight. This is not a man who has found genuine faith. Genuine faith, real, transformative, honest faith, produces humility. It produces a reckoning with what you have actually done. It produces grief that faces outward toward the people you harmed, not inward toward your own experience of consequence. What Chris Watts has found in religion is not faith, it is architecture. He has built a structure that holds him at the center, not as a murderer serving a just sentence, but as a man chosen by God to endure something profound, something that even connects him to Christ. And the women who receive these letters, they are being invited into that architecture, into the story where Chris Watts is the figure whose suffering matters most. It is, in every meaningful sense, the same story he told Shanann for years. Now, if you accept the framework Chris Watts has constructed, that God placed him in prison as part of a divine plan, a natural question follows. Why did it happen at all? Chris Watts has an answer for that, too. In letters and phone calls from prison, disclosed publicly by author Sharon Cadle, who corresponded extensively with Watts and discussed his claims on the doctor. Oz show, Watts told her he was under demon possession the night of the murders, that something supernatural, something outside himself, took over, that he was not fully present, not fully himself. A demonic force acted through him. Think carefully about what this claim accomplishes. It does not deny that something terrible happened. It cannot. He confessed. The evidence is overwhelming and permanently part of the public record. What it does instead is remove his agency entirely. It externalizes the responsibility. It positions him as a victim of a supernatural force. It allows him to maintain the belief that he is fundamentally a good person who was overtaken, rather than a person who made a series of deliberate choices that ended 4 lives. This is the psychological architecture we are dealing with. A man who keeps photos of the family he murdered in his cell, who writes to women from prison, and presents himself as spiritually transformed, who compares his incarceration to the suffering of Christ, who claims he was possessed by demons the night he killed his wife and children. Every single piece of this puzzle fits together, not into the portrait of a man who has faced what he did and been broken by it, but into the portrait of a man who has spent every moment since his conviction constructing a version of reality in which he remains the central figure deserving of sympathy, attention, and even admiration. The performance has not stopped. It has only adapted. Before he was arrested, Chris Watts gave a television interview standing on his front porch. He looked into the camera and said he wanted his family back. He said he missed them. He said he had no idea where they were, all while knowing exactly where they were, because he had put them there. That performance fooled almost no one. The body language experts tore it apart. The investigators saw through it immediately. The public recognized something deeply wrong within hours. But the performance he is giving now, from inside Dodge Correctional, is more sophisticated. It is tailored to a specific audience. Women who are looking for someone to save. People who want to believe in redemption. Individuals who find the idea of a broken man finding God to be compelling enough that they overlook what he actually did to get into that cell. And it is working. The letters keep coming. The pen-pal relationships continue. The women send photographs. He writes back. He has nothing else to do. So he feeds his ego that way. Inside that building, Chris Watts has no power. He is told when to wake up, when to eat, when to work, when to sleep. He cannot go where he wants. He cannot see who he wants. He cannot make decisions about his own life in any meaningful way. Except in one area, the letters, the relationships he builds through correspondence, the narrative he constructs about who he is and why he is there. That is the only space where he still has control. And he is using it exactly the way you would expect a man of his psychological profile to use it. The Bible study he attends is real. The scripture he reads is real. The letters he writes referencing God and faith and transformation are real. But the function they serve is not spiritual. It is psychological. They allow him to remain the person he has always needed to be. Someone who is admired. Someone who is desired. Someone who is seen as special. Not a custodian mopping floors in a maximum security prison. Not a man universally despised by the people around him. Not someone whose name will be remembered for one of the most horrific family annihilations in modern American history, but a man chosen by God. A man whose suffering has meaning. A man who glimpses the crucifixion through his own trials. The people who write to him are not seeing Chris Watts as he actually is. They are seeing the character he has written for himself, and he is very, very good at staying in character. This is a man who looked investigators in the eye and failed a polygraph while insisting he had no idea what happened to his family, who stood in front of television cameras and played the worried husband, who called Shanann's friend and asked if she had heard from her, knowing she never would again. The capacity to perform under pressure, to present a false version of reality with conviction, is not something that goes away just because you are in prison. It is a core part of who he is. And every letter that comes out of Dodge Correctional Institution proves it. The question is not whether Chris Watts feels remorse. People can feel remorse and still be primarily focused on themselves. People can experience guilt and still construct narratives that minimize their responsibility. The question is whether anything about his behavior, his words, his choices, since being incarcerated, suggests that he has fundamentally reckoned with what he took from this world. Shanann Watts was 34 years old. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a son they were going to name Nico. She was a mother who documented her life, her love for her children, her belief in her marriage, all over social media. She trusted the man sleeping next to her. Bella Watts was 4 years old. She recorded a video calling her father a hero. Investigators believe, based on evidence found at the scene, that she may have been present when her mother was killed. She was alive when her father drove her to the oil site. She watched what happened to her little sister before it happened to her. Celeste Watts was 3 years old. She was found in a separate oil tank from her sister. The openings to those tanks were 8 inches wide. Their father had to force their bodies through. Nico Watts never took a breath. He never had a name officially recorded. He existed only as a possibility, a future, a hope, and he was gone before he ever had a chance. Those are the people whose photographs Chris Watts keeps in his cell. Those are the people whose lives ended because of choices he made. And those are the people whose suffering he has never, in any documented statement, centered in his understanding of why he is in prison. Instead, he centers himself, his pain, his trials, his glimpse of the crucifixion, his relationship with God, his inability to be with a pen pal because of divine will. The letters are not evidence of transformation. They are evidence of consistency. He has always been the center of his own story. Prison has not changed that. It has only changed the set design. Now, there is a broader conversation happening around Chris Watts that goes beyond the letters. It has to do with the way our culture interacts with men who commit violent crimes, particularly men who fit a certain profile. Clean-cut, conventionally attractive, soft-spoken, polite. There is a subset of people, predominantly women, who are drawn to incarcerated men. This is not a new phenomenon. It is well documented. Psychologists have studied it. Journalists have written about it. And it happens across all kinds of cases, from low-level offenders to serial killers. But there is something uniquely disturbing about it happening in this case. Because Chris Watts did not kill strangers. He did not kill in the heat of passion, or during the commission of another crime. He killed his wife while she slept. He killed his daughters after spending the morning with them. He disposed of their bodies in one of the most dehumanizing ways imaginable. And yet, women are sending him photographs, writing him letters, offering him the kind of attention and validation that he craves. They are doing exactly what he needs them to do. They are allowing him to continue being the person he was before he was caught. This is not about whether those women have the right to write to him. Legally, they do. This is about what it tells us. About him. About the dynamic he cultivates. About the way certain kinds of people can continue to manipulate even from behind bars. He is not passively receiving mail and reluctantly responding. According to sources, he is actively engaging. He writes back. He builds relationships. He presents a version of himself designed to draw people in. And it works. Because the version of himself he presents in those letters is not a monster. It is a man who made a terrible mistake. A man who was not himself. A man who has found God and is suffering deeply for what happened. A man who is introspective, thoughtful, and spiritually awakened. That version is appealing. It offers the fantasy of understanding someone no one else understands. Of seeing good in someone the world has written off. of being special enough to reach someone unreachable, but it is a fantasy. And the man on the other end of those letters knows exactly how to sustain it. The two conduct violations on his record, one in 2020 and one in 2021, suggest that the compliant, rule-following persona he projects is not the full story. Unauthorized communication, unauthorized transfer of property, disobeying orders, possession of contraband. These are not major violations. They did not result in significant punishment, but they are telling. They show that even within the highly controlled environment of a maximum security prison, Chris Watts has found ways to operate outside the rules when it serves him. And that should not be surprising. This is a man who maintained a months-long affair while living with his wife and children, who lied to everyone in his life simultaneously, who presented one face to Shanann, another to his mistress, another to his co-workers, another to his neighbors. The ability to compartmentalize, to maintain multiple versions of reality, to break rules while appearing to follow them, is not new behavior. It is the same behavior in a different context. Prison has not rehabilitated Chris Watts. It has contained him. And even within that containment, he has found the space to continue doing what he has always done: performing, manipulating, centering himself. The photographs in his cell are a perfect example. When the public found out, the reaction was immediate and visceral. How could he be allowed to keep photos of the people he killed? How is that not psychological torture, even if the only person being tortured is himself? But the Department of Corrections was clear. There is no legal basis to remove personal photographs from an inmate's cell. Inmates are allowed to have photos of family members. And legally, Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were his family. The petition with over 20,000 signatures failed because the law does not account for this specific situation. It does not distinguish between a prisoner keeping photos of loved ones who are still alive and a prisoner keeping photos of family members he murdered. So the photos remain, and Chris Watts looks at them. What he thinks when he does, we cannot know. But we can look at everything else he has said and done since his incarceration and draw some conclusions. He does not talk about their suffering. He talks about his own. He does not center their loss. He centers his trials. He does not reflect outwardly on the pain he caused. He reflects inwardly on the pain he feels. That is not the pattern of someone who has been broken by guilt. That is the pattern of someone who has been inconvenienced by consequences. If this video has made you think differently about this case, about the psychology of family annihilators, or about the way some people continue to manipulate even from prison, do me a favor. Leave a comment and let me know what stood out to you most. And if you have not already, subscribe to True Crime Dre and hit that notification bell. In the demon possession narrative, he did not load Shanann's body and his 2 living children into his truck and drive them to a remote oil field with his daughters still alive in the back seat. He did not make deliberate choices at that site. He did not place their small bodies into crude oil tanks with openings so narrow that investigators would later find evidence of the struggle to fit them through. None of that deliberate, calculated, documented reality appears in the story he tells from inside Dodge Correctional Institution. The demon did it. He was a vessel. And now he is here, a man acted upon by dark forces, sitting in a cell, growing closer to God. Sharon Cadle herself, the author who spent more time corresponding with Watts than almost anyone outside his immediate family, has stated plainly that she believes his religious conversion is a performance. A strategy designed to appear reformed, not the real thing. And it connects directly to the next letter. Because if a demon caused the murders, then surely no human being is to blame. And yet, there is one specific human, Chris Watts, cannot resist holding responsible. In a letter obtained by the Daily Mail, Chris Watts wrote about his former mistress, Nicole Kessinger. He opened, as he often does, by stating that he takes full responsibility for what happened. And then, in the very same letter, he called Kessinger a harlot, a Jezebel, a wicked woman who led him astray with sweet words of destruction. He wrote that he had been misled by her, that he was weak and let her cloud his morals and his judgment, and that he would leave her fate, her justice, entirely to God. Let this be absolutely clear. Nicole Kessinger was never implicated in the murders, not by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, not by the FBI, not by the Weld County District Attorney, not by any investigative body that examined this case from any angle. She was a woman Watts chose to have an affair with. When the murders became public, she came forward. She cooperated completely with law enforcement. She provided information. She answered every question investigators asked. She did not plan anything. She did not participate in anything. She did not know what he had done until the rest of the world found out. In fact, it was Kessinger's unease with his calm reaction to his family's disappearance that contributed to investigators focusing on him more closely. She noticed something was wrong. She expressed concern. She helped build the case against him, not alongside him. And yet, in the theology Chris Watts has built inside that cell, she is Jezebel, the biblical figure of seduction and corruption. The wicked woman whose influence on a man of faith led to catastrophe. He takes full responsibility, and she is a harlot who led him astray. He was possessed by a demon, and he was also misled by a Jezebel. These two explanations exist simultaneously in his letters, without any apparent awareness of their contradiction. Because for Chris Watts, internal consistency has never been the point. The point is, whatever narrative, in any given moment, allows him to remain sympathetic to himself and to whoever is reading. A demon, a Jezebel, God's divine plan. Not once, in any letter, any call, any documented communication from inside that prison, has he produced anything that resembles genuine, undeflected ownership of what he chose to do. Not once. And now, a detail in this update that genuinely stopped me. Author Sharon Cadle, who visited Watts in prison multiple times and corresponded with him for years, revealed publicly that Watts told her directly that he intends to leave prison someday. And then he made a request that left her speechless. Knowing that Cadle had a granddaughter the same age as Celeste, he asked her during one of their phone calls whether she would allow him to watch her granddaughter if he was ever out of prison. Cadle's response was immediate. There was no world in which that would ever happen. Watts replied, "People will realize that I will never do anything like this again." Let that sit for a moment. A man convicted of murdering 2 toddlers is making future childcare requests. A man with 5 consecutive life sentences and no possibility of parole is operating as if release is part of his expected future. Experts who have studied his communication patterns consistently describe this kind of thinking as deeply narcissistic. The belief that the rules, legal, moral, institutional, do not fully and permanently apply to him. That belief did not enter prison with him. That belief is him. Now, long after this video stops being watched, the names Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico will still mean something to the people who have followed this case. But inside Dodge Correctional Institution, Chris Watts wakes up every day in a reality that apparently does not include the permanence of his sentence. He is 40 years old. He has no appeals in motion, no legal avenue to freedom, no mechanism by which a life sentence without parole becomes anything other than what it says. And yet he is asking about babysitting. He is telling people he will leave. He is functioning in his own mind, as though this is temporary. That is not hope. That is not faith. That is a fundamental disconnection from reality. And it raises a question that matters deeply to understanding this case. If he cannot accept the reality of his sentence, can he accept the reality of what he did to receive it? In 2025, a video went massively viral on TikTok, claiming that Chris Watts had been attacked inside prison and might be dead. The video spread with extraordinary speed. The comments flooded in, reactions ranging from barely concealed satisfaction to open statements celebrating what the video claimed had happened. The sentiment was raw and real and human. People who have carried Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico in some part of their minds since 2018, responding to the video with the kind of emotional release that a case like this rarely provides through official channels. The video was confirmed to be fabricated, stitched together from footage filmed at 3 entirely different prison facilities. None of it clearly showed Watts. Dodge Correctional confirmed directly he had not been attacked. He was, and remains, alive and well inside Dodge. But I want to stay with the response to that video for a moment, because the speed and intensity of the public reaction tells you something important about how this case still lives in people 7.5 years later. There is a particular kind of unresolved feeling that attaches itself to cases like this. A sense that justice, the legal kind, the kind delivered through courts and sentences, cannot actually reach what happened. That no sentence long enough, no cell small enough, fully addresses what was taken. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, Nico. 4 people gone in a single night. No verdict restores that. And buried in the thousands of comments underneath that viral video was a single remark that has stayed with me. Someone wrote simply, "I have been to Dodge. I have actually seen him walking down the hallway once." Nothing more. No anger, no drama, just the quiet, factual confirmation. He is there. He is real. He walks down hallways. He is alive. And they are not. I want to take this stretch of the video to pull back and look at the full picture. Because I think the most valuable thing this update can do is not simply catalog the shocking things Chris Watts has been saying from inside that cell. It is to help you understand what those things reveal collectively about who this man is. Taken individually, the Jesus comparison, the demon possession, the Jezebel accusation, the belief he will leave prison, each could perhaps be explained away in isolation. Religion without wisdom. Psychological fragmentation, bitterness, denial. But take them together, and the pattern is unmistakable. Every single narrative Chris Watts has constructed since entering Dodge follows the same structural logic. He is always acted upon, never the actor. A demon acted through him. A Jezebel acted upon him. God is acting for him. In every version, he is the object. Something else is the subject. This is not what genuine accountability looks like. Genuine accountability is uncomfortable, unadorned, and directed outward toward the people harmed, not inward toward the self. What Chris Watts is producing in those letters is the same psychology that allowed him to plan those murders while tucking his daughters into bed. The same architecture that let him stand in front of cameras the morning after and perform the role of the worried father. The same fundamental inability to inhabit the reality of what he has done to other people. Because other people, at the level that truly matters, have never fully registered for him the way he registers for himself. He is not a new creature in Christ. He is the same person in a smaller room with a different audience. And the women writing to him are receiving the same experience Shanann received. A man extraordinarily capable of making someone feel seen, chosen, special, for exactly as long as it serves his purposes. The performance did not end with the sentence. It found new material. Now, there is something I need to address because it plays into the broader understanding of how Chris Watts continues to manipulate narrative even from behind bars. In his letters, particularly those discussing his faith, he often uses language that sounds humble. He talks about being broken, about needing God, about his failures and weaknesses. But notice what he never does. He never names Shanann and says, "I took her life, and I live with that every single day." He never names Bella and Celeste and says, "I ended their futures, and I cannot undo that." He never acknowledges Nico as a person who had a name, who was wanted, who was gone because of him. The brokenness he describes is always abstract. The failures are always framed in spiritual terms. The weakness is always connected to external forces. Demons, Jezebels, temptation. What he will not do is speak plainly about what his hands did, what his choices caused, what the people in those photographs experienced because of him. And that is the difference between performance and transformation. Transformation requires you to stay in the room with the worst thing you have ever done until you fully understand it. Not as a narrative, not as a theological concept, but as a specific, irreversible harm you caused to specific, irreplaceable people. Chris Watts has spent nearly 8 years in prison. He has had time. He has had silence. He has had nothing but hours to sit with what he did. And what has emerged from that time is not a man who has stayed in the room with his guilt. It is a man who has redecorated the room until it looks like something he can live in comfortably. The letters to women are part of that redecoration. The religious language is part of that redecoration. The demon possession claim, the Jezebel accusation, the belief in future release. All of it is infrastructure designed to make his internal world bearable. Not by confronting what he did, but by constructing a version of events where he remains, fundamentally, a good person to whom bad things happened. That is not remorse. That is self-preservation. And it is the same psychological mechanism that allowed him to function normally in the days and weeks leading up to the murders. The same capacity to compartmentalize, to perform, to maintain a version of himself that does not include the truth of what he is capable of. Prison did not create this. It just gave it a new stage. There is a moment in one of the police body cam videos from the day Shanann and the girls were reported missing. Chris Watts is standing on his front porch. A neighbor has just shown police the security footage of Watts loading something into his truck early that morning. Watts is calm. He is cooperative. He is playing the role. And if you watch his face in that footage, if you really study it, what you see is not panic. It is performance. He is doing what he has always done, presenting the version of himself from the situation requires. That ability did not disappear when the handcuffs went on. It adapted. And the letters coming out of Dodge Correctional in 2026 are proof that the adaptation is ongoing. He knows his audience. He knows what women who write to incarcerated men are often looking for. Someone misunderstood, someone redeemable, someone whose pain they can ease. And he gives them exactly that. He knows what religious communities value: humility, testimony, transformation through faith. And he uses that language fluently. He knows what true crime followers want: details, insight, explanation. And he parcels those out strategically, often through intermediaries like Cadle, in ways that keep him relevant, keep him discussed, keep him centered. Every single move is calculated, not in the sense that he is sitting in his cell scheming, but in the sense that calculation is his default setting. It is how he has always operated. And incarceration has not changed that. It has only narrowed the field of operation. The question that haunts this case is not what he did. We know what he did. The evidence is overwhelming. The confession is on record. The details are public. The question is why? And more specifically, how? How does a person do that and then continue living as though they are still fundamentally the same person they were before? And I think the letters answer that question more clearly than anything else in this case. He continues living that way because, in his own mind, he is the same person. The murders were an aberration, something that happened to him, not something that revealed him. And if you can maintain that belief, if you can genuinely hold on to the idea that the person you were before is the person you still are, then everything else follows. The religious conversion makes sense because you are a good person who fell and is now rising. The pen-pal relationships make sense because you are still someone worthy of love and attention. The belief in future release makes sense because the life sentence is unjust, disproportionate, not reflective of who you truly are. It all makes sense, but only if you accept the foundational lie that Chris Watts is separate from what Chris Watts did. He is not. What he did is the most honest thing about him, not because he is defined only by his worst act, but because that act required a psychological architecture that was already in place. The compartmentalization, the performance, the ability to prioritize his own needs over the lives of the people closest to him. All of that existed long before August 2018. The murders did not come out of nowhere. They came out of him. And the same structures that made those murders possible are the structures producing the letters, the religious claims, the blame shifting, the requests to babysit. It is all the same person. It has always been the same person. Prison has not changed him. It has just removed his access to the tools he used to hide. I want to end this video not with Chris Watts, because this case is not his story. It never was. Just weeks ago, in March 2026, Shanann's father, Frank Rujek, sat down for a new Fox Nation documentary, and he said something that has stayed with me. He said he had never seen so much evil in this world toward his family, toward other victims. He was not talking about what happened in August 2018. He was talking about the years of online harassment that have followed his family since the conviction. The conspiracy theories that recast Shanann as somehow responsible for her own murder. The cruelty directed at a family who lost a daughter, 2 granddaughters, and an unborn grandson in a single night, and then had to spend nearly a decade defending the memory of the people they loved. Nearly 8 years later, Frank Ruzicka is still sitting in front of cameras, still defending Shanann, still telling the world that the hate needs to stop. While the man who made all of it necessary is in Wisconsin, comparing himself to Jesus, blaming a Jezebel, telling pen pals God has plans for his life, asking about watching other people's grandchildren. Shanann was 34 years old. She was a wife, a mother, a daughter, a friend. She documented her life because she loved it. She trusted the man she married. She believed in the family they were building. Bella was 4 years old. She called her father a hero. She believed he would protect her. Instead, she spent the last moments of her life learning the opposite. Celeste was 3 years old. She was found in a separate tank from her sister. The investigators who recovered her body have never spoken publicly about what that scene looked like. Some things are too cruel to put into words. Nico never took his first breath. He had a name. He was wanted. He was mourned. He is buried with his mother and sisters in North Carolina, where Shanann grew up. 4 graves that should not exist. I made a promise at the start of this video. I said that by the end, you would understand something about Chris Watts that no other update has said out loud. Yet, here it is. The reason this case refuses to leave us, the reason you are watching videos about it in 2026, is not because of what he did. It is because of what he has not done since. Every letter, every religious claim, every comparison to Christ, every demon, every Jezebel, every conversation about leaving prison, every request to watch a child, all of it is proof. Continuous, ongoing, documented proof that the person capable of doing what he did in August 2018 is still entirely intact. Nothing changed, nothing broke, nothing was rebuilt. He is the same. And that, more than the crime itself, more than the sentence, more than any single detail in this update, is the most disturbing truth in this entire case. The man who killed his family is still the man who believes he deserves sympathy, attention, admiration, and eventually freedom. The psychological architecture that allowed him to annihilate his family while maintaining the belief that he was a good person has not collapsed, it has fortified. He looks at photographs of the people he murdered and somehow continues to center his own experience. He writes letters to women and presents himself as worthy of their affection. He reads scripture and finds in it not a mirror that shows him his guilt, but a framework that elevates his suffering to something spiritually significant. He has been in prison for over 7 years. He has 5 life sentences. He has no possibility of parole. He has no legal path to freedom. And yet he operates daily, as though none of that is permanent. Because to accept that it is permanent, he would have to accept what made it necessary. And he cannot do that. Not because he is incapable of understanding what he did, but because understanding it, truly inhabiting the reality of it, would shatter the version of himself he needs to survive. So he builds. He builds narratives. He builds theology. He builds relationships through letters. He builds a version of reality where he is acted upon, never acting. Where he is a victim of demons, of Jezebels, of circumstances beyond his control. And in that constructed reality, he is not a family annihilator. He is a man tested by God, a man who glimpses the crucifixion, a man who will, someday, be understood, forgiven, released. That is the man in Dodge Correctional right now. Not a man transformed by guilt, but a man still performing the only role he has ever truly mastered. Himself, misunderstood. The families of victims in cases like this often say the same thing, that the hardest part is not the verdict or the sentence. It is watching the person who destroyed their lives continue living as though the destruction was incidental. Chris Watts is living. He is healthy. He is writing letters. He is attending Bible study. He is making plans for a future that will never come. And Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico are gone. Permanently, irreversibly. Because of choices he made. That imbalance is what stays with people. That is what makes this case impossible to file away. Because the resolution, the legal one, does not touch the moral reality. He is alive, and they are not. He is performing transformation, and they are erased. He is asking to babysit, and their graves are still being visited by a family that will never recover from what he took. If you made it to the end of this video, genuinely, thank you. This is not easy content to sit with, but Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico deserve to have their story told accurately. And the people who follow this case deserve to understand what is actually happening, not just the headlines. Drop a comment and tell me what hit you hardest in this update. The crucifixion comparison, the demon possession claim, the Jezebel letter, or the conversation about watching someone else's grandchild. I read every single one. And if this video made you think, if it gave you insight you had not considered before, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe to True Crime Dre if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. This channel exists because you are here, because you care about the truth, because you refuse to let victims be forgotten. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for watching until the end. And thank you for carrying the memory of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico forward. I will see you in the next one.